Scalia, why is it important to tie current decisions to the framers' views, in your view?
Well, I don't care a fig for the framers. I care for the people that ratified the Constitution. I don't believe in original intent. I believe in original meaning. What was the meaning of the Constitution when the people ratified it? You quoted Jefferson that the validity of government depends upon the consent of the governed, and you find that consent in what the people agreed to. So what the people agreed to when they adopted the Constitution, what they agreed to when they adopted the Bill of Rights, is what ought to govern us. Now, the Bill of Rights is, as I have said, in a sense, anti-democratic, in that it prevents the current majority from doing what it would like to do. But in another sense, it is quite democratic. The Bill of Rights was adopted, after all, democratically. It was the people self-limiting their power. Now, the meaning of that, whether it, for example, whether it prohibits the death penalty, whether the Eighth Amendment that prohibits cruel and unusual punishments, forbids the death penalty. There is no doubt that no American ever voted for that when they voted to ratify the Eighth Amendment. The death was the penalty for all felonies. It was the definition of a felony. It's why we have Western movies, because horse thieving was a felony, and we wouldn't have had Western movies without that. So to say that nowadays, well, things are different, and we think the death penalty is a horrible thing, and therefore, since we think so, it's prohibited to the people, that is not being faithful to the will of the people. States are free to adopt it or to refuse to adopt it, to repeal it. But to say that there's something in the Constitution that requires that they abolish it is simply not following the will of the governed.
And Justice Breyer, you've written that our Constitution begins with the words, "We the people," not "we the people of 1787." Why is that an important distinction in your view?
I think, as I've asked myself this, I think it's interesting, this event, in part, because it suggests where Justice Scalia and I are tremendous agreement. I mean, the members of this court are unanimous in 30 to 40% of the cases. The 5-4s are only a few, maybe 25%. And those issues are typically issues, since I think that's our job, is in a sense to patrol the boundaries of the Constitution. We're there, it's a document that creates a government. And it was supposed to create a government that would work. And that kind of workable democracy was supposed to last a long time. But our job is to apply the words that created the government, and not just those that protect liberty, though there's some important ones that do that, to circumstances today. And we're likely to hear cases that are at the boundary. Otherwise, what's the case doing here, if the answer is so obvious? So it's hardly surprising that people don't agree on many of these cases, where there are good arguments on both sides. But now I'm getting to your question, because what you really want to know is why in so many cases are we on different sides? And that is a question I ask myself. And I think the answer, in part, is this. And this is why I think we both would say this document is meant to govern people from now indefinitely, they said in 1787. So it has to last. And that we read into their intent. It's there. That's what they wanted. And I read it into the meaning of the Constitution. And how do we get there? There's where we might differ. I think when we read language in any document, whether it's a statute or the Constitution, in any difficult case, a judge will read the words 1. We'll look at the history, 2. We'll look to the traditions surrounding the words. What does habeas corpus mean? That's 3. We'll look at precedent. That's 4. We'll look to see what the purpose or the value is underlying that particular phrase. That's 5. And we'll 6, look at the consequences of deciding one way or another through the lens of those values or purposes. I think we all do that. And I think, if I can characterize Justice Scalia, he's happier when he's only looking at the first 4, and I'm happier when I'm looking at the last 2. And when I say happier, I don't just mean psychologically happy, but that I think that by looking at those last 2 things, purposes or values and consequences viewed in light of the purposes, that we can better carry out that initial intent that this document will in fact govern a changing society as society changes over the course of centuries. And I don't want to put words in Justice Scalia's mouth, but I think my approach makes him very nervous because I think that he's afraid I, or if not me, others who follow this approach, will end up subjecting their subjective ideas, substituting those subjective ideas for something objective, and that's risky. Now, he can confirm whether that's true or not. I, of course, think that there isn't much of a risk, but he thinks there is. And anyway, am I right that he's happier on the first?